And they take it into the plant where the guys get to work on it, right? And so this looks like something out of Dante's Inferno. So here we are, it's 30 degrees out. These guys are in this plant where they're bleaching. So if you take seaweed, if you take any of the kelp around here, and you toss it into boiling water, and Chris does that, Chris Ernie would do that at Rossmount. Take that in, it'll bleach out some of the brownish pigment and leave you with green pigment. So your kelp will go from brown to almost grass green. And so they do that in the plant, except so with all the seaweed coming in, they've got this conveyor belt going into these huge steaming baths. So imagine standing at 30 degrees, these guys are, there's not an ounce of fat on any of them. And so it goes through this bath, and it goes out the other end where then it goes on to the next step. But these guys are just working and sweating to beat the band. So it comes out where it gets salted. So they throw some salt on it, which then sort of starts drying it out and dehydrating it a little bit. And it goes up for processing, so it goes through all of this. Any bad pieces get cut off and moved on. And then it gets bagged, or it goes to the next step, where we get into making a couple of different products. So they start shredding it. You can see the lady shredding it here. It's making this stuff. And this one's making these little, it looks almost like shish kebabs of kelp. Where they roll it over, there's a couple of bamboo skewers put in there. And then she, bang, down it goes. And now they're all uniform size, and they all get put into plants and go. This doesn't look all that safe to me, but anyway, that's the way it is. These things are old, they're cast iron, I'm sure they're still working, right? But anyway, they put them in, and they make a ton of this stuff, which goes off to be packaged and more salted and whatnot. This guy is Mr. Q, and he is the CEO of this, and he's got to be the closest thing I've ever seen to a Taipan. He is incredibly powerful. He has a driver that drives him around, and in his Mercedes. He's got this huge office with this giant desk. No word of lie, that his desk has to be as long as this entire length of chairs, plus a wing on it, plus he has a great big steering wheel, which is the symbol of power, like the ship's wheel in there. And it's full of carvings. It's incredible. It's almost like Bill's office, but not quite as grand. But the other thing is, when he's around, everybody is paying attention. Everybody has their head down. They're doing exactly what they have to do, and so it's just amazing to see the power that guy has. We also, on the last little bit, we went to this Chideo Aquatic Products. Now, this is an enhancement. So not only do it's not just aquaculture, these are sort of ranching. And they take some of the juvenile sea urchins that they produce, the abalone that they produce, and the sea cucumbers, and they just plant them on these reefs that they have. And so they have these leases around the area, and they let them grow, and then they come back, and so they've got the divers. Now, the divers, you saw one on the front picture on that, for the opening slide. Actually, quite interesting there. Again, a health and safety nightmare. They're dive, but they're in these suits. They're not neoprene, so they're canvas. They're rubberized canvas, which is what they used to be, right? And you can still buy sort of rubberized dive suits with no insulation. The point is that so they've got this knot, a special knot that they tie to climb in from the front, and so that keeps it waterproof. But when you go down, just the pressure of the water will give you suit squeeze. So you actually have to get air into your suit. Well, what they've done is they've laminated in juice drink tops, like the ones on water bottles that you pull up, right? So that's what they're using. Now, when I go buy a valve, it's like $200 or $300 to put my dry suit. Anyway, it's different styles in different areas. So we went back to Qingdao, and this was, of course, the whole reason we went over initially was for this symposium on integrated multi-trophic aquaculture. It was a great meeting. We met a lot of people. It was done in conjunction. They had multiple meetings going on at the same time. One of them was on water recovery. China has a real water drought problem, and so they're looking at things like, reverse osmosis and whatnot to basically recover water from the ocean, and to how do you move that around. So we were just one of a series of conferences that were going on internationally at that time. It was a great meeting. There was a lot of stuff that's going on in China that was helpful to us, and they were quite interested in what we were doing too, in taking, and trying to assimilate more, have another kick at a lot of these nutrients. When you're doing filter feeders, it's not quite as important necessarily, with scallops, because they're taking natural phytoplankton out of the area and whatnot. But when you're actually putting fish food in the water, you're actually putting additional energy in. There's a lot more potential energy that comes out of that, and you can actually recycle that quite a bit more and get more of it. So they're quite interested in the work that we're doing on that. Just again, sort of some random images. They use, because the sea is such a way of life, the fact that you have a highway doesn't necessarily mean it has to be a highway all the time. This was a brand new stretch of road. It still had nice lines on it, everything else. 2 lanes, they just shut half of it off because they're drying seaweed on half of the community. And when you crawled over the fence, which I did, there's another huge field there which is completely covered with seaweed. And a lot of that goes into that alginate company that we saw in, just one of them, but that Sunny one in Chennai. This is another interesting image. I don't know if you can see it. This is a guy on a motorcycle. The things that you see behind him are the 5-gallon water bottles that you'd have in the coolers. Right? Well, this is the water delivery system. If you look closely, he's got about 7 or 8 of these water cooler bottles, all strapped in various forms to his motorcycle, and he delivers those from hotel to hotel. So, I can't imagine having that much water on a motorcycle. Now, anyway, that's just the way it sort of happens. This lady here is a world expert in what's called foraminiferous. Now, probably, aside from Gerhardt, probably not too many people have actually heard of foraminiferous. They're very small invertebrates. They produce shells. They're incredibly lovely, and often you need a microscope to see them. She's one of the world experts in them. She basically studies them, makes models of them, and then, at a much larger size. And so she displays them all over. She's so successful at this. She has a whole business of selling them as sort of jewelry and whatnot. And there's a park in internal China, or in inland China, where they have, huge scale replicas of these things all over in her honor, sort of thing, in her province that she came from. Anyway, so we got to meet her, and but these are just some examples. This is interesting. This is, at least for me, this is it's like the universal transport. This is a 2-part thing. This is a wagon on the back. This is engine, so it looks an awful lot like a rototiller to me, except without the tines on it. Except that, so there's a big engine, there's a couple big wheels. This turns into everything from hauling garbage away, to hauling dirt, to going and getting food and bringing hay in off the fields, or taking the family around, or going to church, or whatever it is they're going, right? And so you'll see all of these things, and this guy drives it, and they can whiz along at probably 60 or 70 kilometers an hour in the middle of all the cars and traffic and stuff, with Ma and the kids on the back. And but it was quite an interesting example of a utility vehicle. So anyway, in conclusion, and what did I come away with? Well, what I found was that I would say that the world's a pretty small place. For me to get over to China in 20 hours to one of these remote places and see it all, the world has definitely got a real small feel to it. A lot of the problems we have are all common. We have the same issues that we do, just at different scales and in different ways. And that sort of diagram that I showed you in front, they emphasize different parts of that diagram. So the takeaway messages are, for me, was that China leads the world in agriculture, but partly because they need the food, right? That they're driven. Hungry people are grumpy people, and you don't need that many people being grumpy. And so they have the technology to do that, and it's moved along. As we look at looking at what I talked about at the start with the increase in the human population, we're going to have more and more of those pressures, perhaps not to the same scale, but the point is that all of those things are happening even here. They use their hatchery technology very well. They've developed it because they've had to. That works to produce food. And so whether we take that as as one of our things or not. IMTA is alive and well. It's happening really. IMTA now is putting the seaweed and the shellfish together. There's a little bit of fish out there in the mix right now, but not so much. And a lot of the bays, which are just solid fish, are seeing problems with anoxia, right? If you put too many fish in a bay, and you have no way of synthesizing all the organics that go down and convert it into inorganic in a way, then you're ripe for problems. And we see signs of that around here on occasion as well. They're growing a lot more different species. They're diversified in a lot of ways. Their tastes are perhaps a little bit broader than ours are. But they're definitely focusing in on a lot more. What else? Well, it's changing very rapidly. You should talk to people that have been there even a couple of years ago, and they just say, I'm amazed. I was talking to Charlotte Gavin, for example. She was back within 2 or 3 years, and she saw huge changes just in the short time that she was away. And people are flocking to the cities and leaving the rural areas, the same as they're doing in North America as well. It was interesting. One of the sayings they came up with, and this is what they told me, was that in China the government's rich and the people are poor, and it's vice versa in the West. The government's always looking for money in North America. The government has all the money in a lot of cases in China with all the wealth that's coming in, the foreign trade and whatnot. They can build a lot of this stuff and decide, that this initiative is going forward. And so some of the plazas and some of the buildings and things that are constructed are really fantastic. The production of food trumps environmental concerns. If you look at the side, so this is just another shot of China. This is all developed, right? Where's the buffer strip that we would be asking for, with Environment Canada or looking at that? There is none. These are issues with the ponds, and like I say, these started out as shrimp ponds, and they were converted to sea cucumber ponds. Now they're being converted to this thing called freshwater crab. So freshwater crab is an anadromous, or anadromous, yeah. So they basically spawn in salt water, and they grow up in freshwater. And what's happening is that they put these larvae, or they produce them in a hatchery, and they put them in the ponds. Well, these shrimp larvae, or the crab larvae need to eat something. Well, they need to eat rotifers, or zooplankton. Well, the zooplankton need something to eat. Well, they need algae. So they put in a lot of ammonia or nutrients, nitrates, into the water to grow algae, to grow the zooplankton, so the crab larvae can eat those. Well, once they get all that cycle done, then the larvae are harvested. Once the larvae metamorphose, then they put them into, I'm going somewhere with this story. They take the larvae, or the juveniles, and put those into the lakes and rivers to grow them up to feed the crab market. But you still have all this nutrient-rich water. So what do? They just pull the gates, and of course it flushes out into the Yellow Sea. Okay. This is. Do you remember the Olympics and the Qingdao sailing fiasco with all of the green algae that was on the shore? Well, there's a lot more to the story than that, and it ties back to those crab ponds. With all the nutrients that get flushed from those crab ponds, that nitrate goes out into the Yellow Sea. Close to shore, there's a lot of sediment, so there's not much light getting into the water. And what happens is that the water just keeps diluting out, and the nitrates get transported offshore until the sediment falls out of the water, right? The water starts to clear up. Now you've got nutrient-rich water with some sunlight in it, and bam, you get a lot of growth of green algae. And what you wind up with is this. This is ova, or the same sea lettuce or whatever that we would see on our beaches here, except that now there's huge rafts of it out there. And when I mean huge rafts, these rafts are measured in miles out in the middle of the Yellow Sea. It's like a new Sargasso Sea out there. And what happened during the Olympics was that the winds and the currents brought some of it into Qingdao Harbor and ruined and interfered with the sailing. But they did